My parents announced at a family gathering that they would use my inheritance to pay off my brother's debts. I just listened in silence. They didn't know I had already protected all the money weeks ago. My name is Adrian. I'm 34 years old, and I've always been the one supporting my family. I'm not rich, but I have a decent job as a software engineer in my own apartment, and savings I've worked hard to build. My parents, Luis and Anna, have always been good to me, but my older brother, Marcos, is a different story. I love him, but his life is one disaster after another, and I've always been there to help him. For years, I've paid his bills, given him money, and tried to pull him out of his messes. All because he's my brother, and because I believed one day he'd get back on his feet. 5 years ago, things got bad. Marcos was in a car accident with his 6-year-old daughter, Marta. A drunk driver hit them, and Marta didn't survive. Marcos sank into a deep depression, quit his job, started drinking heavily, and racked up debts he couldn't pay. I did what I could. I paid his medical bills, covered several of his debts, and gave him money to keep him from falling apart. My parents helped too, but they didn't have as much as I did. So most of the burden fell on me. I never complained, even though I sometimes felt exhausted. I thought it was worth it, that Marcos would pull through. I always held on to hope. My grandfather died a year ago, leaving a clear will. His money, earned from his construction company, was to be split between Marcos and me. My parents were the executors, tasked with handling the distribution. For me, that money was my safety net, something to give me stability after so much sacrifice. I also believed Marcos' share would help him start over. It was my hope, but everything changed a few weeks ago. The will was executed, and the money went into a joint account my parents opened to make things easier. We all had access, my parents, Marcos, and me. I thought it would be simple. Everyone would take their share, and that was it. I trusted my parents. I never thought they'd betray me. 2 days after the money hit the account, I went to my parents' house for dinner. Marcos wasn't there, which wasn't unusual. He sometimes shut himself in his apartment and didn't want to see anyone. While helping my mom clear the dishes, I overheard my parents talking in the dining room. They weren't shouting, but their voices carried clearly. "We can't let Marcos keep going like this," my mom, Anna, said. "The debts are killing him. If we don't do something, he'll lose everything." "You're right," my dad, Luis, replied. "But we don't have enough to help him. The banks won't lend to him, and our savings aren't enough." There was a pause, and then my mom said something that froze me. "We can use Adrian's share. It's enough to pay Marcos' debts. Adrian is fine. He doesn't need that money as much as his brother does." I felt a knot in my stomach. My parents were planning to take my inheritance without asking me. All I'd done for Marcos, the years of sacrifice, didn't seem to matter to them. I stayed quiet, finished clearing the dishes, and left with an excuse. That night, I didn't sleep. I was furious, hurt, but above all, determined. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. The next day, I went to the bank, spoke with an advisor, and explained everything. He recommended an irrevocable trust to protect the money so no one, not even my parents, could touch it without my permission. I didn't hesitate. Within 24 hours, I transferred my share of the inheritance to the trust. It was a relief, like I'd taken back control. I didn't tell anyone. I knew they'd find out eventually. But I wanted to handle it my way. A week later, my parents organized a family gathering. They said it was to discuss something important. I knew what it was about, but I wasn't prepared for what happened. We gathered at their house, my parents, Marcos, Samantha's uncles, and cousins. The table was set with food, but the atmosphere was tense. After dinner, my dad stood up and spoke. "We want to tell you something," he began, looking at everyone but especially at me. "Marcos has been through a lot since he lost Marta. His debts are a big problem, and we can't leave him alone. So we decided to use part of my father's inheritance to help him." He looked straight at me and said, "Adrian, you're doing fine financially. You don't need that money like Marcos does. It's what's best for the family." Everyone looked at me. My aunts and uncles nodded, as if it were the most logical thing. Marcos said nothing, just stared at the floor. My mom smiled at me, expecting me to agree without a fuss, but I couldn't believe it. They were acting like my opinion didn't matter, like everything I'd done for Marcos didn't count. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of the silence settle. Then I spoke calmly. Don't worry. That money is already protected. I put it in a trust weeks ago. No one can touch it. The room went quiet. My mom's smile vanished. My dad frowned, confused. Marcos looked up, surprised. And then everything exploded. What did you do? My mom shouted, standing up. How could you do something like that without telling us? Adrian, this is a betrayal. My dad said, his voice angry. We're trying to help your brother, and you do this behind our backs? Marcos didn't say much, but his look was one of resentment. My aunts and uncles murmured, some saying I was selfish, that how could I do this to my brother after everything he'd been through? My mom started crying, saying they were only trying to save Marcos, that I didn't understand the pain of losing a daughter. Everything we've done is for the family, she said through tears. And you, Adrian, turn your back on us? That made my blood boil. I couldn't stay silent. Turn my back, I said, trying not to shout. I've paid Marcos his debts for years. I've given everything I had to help him, and now, without asking me, you want to take my inheritance? Is that fair? No one answered. My parents exchanged looks, and my mom spoke again, softer this time. Adrian, Marcos lost Marta. He's broken. You don't know what that's like. He needs this money more than you. That hurt, not because I didn't understand Marcos' pain, but because they were using Marta's death to manipulate me, as if my sacrifices meant nothing, as if my stability didn't matter. The gathering ended badly. My parents insisted it was my duty to help Marcos, that the trust was selfish. My aunts and uncles took their side, saying the family should stick together. Marcos barely spoke, but when he did, he said he expected more from me. I felt like the bad guy, but I wasn't going to back down. That money was mine, and I protected it for a reason. That night in my apartment, I got a message from my mom. She said she needed to talk, that she was worried about Marcos, that she couldn't believe I was so cold. I didn't respond. Marcos called, but I didn't answer. I knew what was coming. More attempts to make me feel guilty, but something in me had changed. For the first time, I put myself first. A few days later, Marcos showed up at my apartment unannounced. He was disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes, and smelled of alcohol. He said he needed the money, that without it, he couldn't go on. He talked about Marta, how her death had destroyed him. Then his tone shifted, and he accused me of abandoning him, of being a selfish brother. He said the trust was a slap in his face. I didn't expect this from you, Adrian, he said before leaving. I thought we were family. His words hit me, but not as much as the fact that my family thought they could decide for me without asking. I'd given so much for them, and now they treated me like the enemy. I didn't know what would happen next, but I was clear. I wouldn't let them manipulate me. The days that followed were chaos. My phone wouldn't stop. My mom sent tearful, reproachful messages, saying Marcos was on the edge of the abyss, that I was his only hope. My dad was harsher, leaving voicemails that started calm but ended in warnings. Adrian, this isn't over. We're family, and family doesn't act like this. Even my aunts and uncles got involved, sending messages saying I was tearing the family apart, that my grandfather would be ashamed. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because every message made me feel more trapped, like they were trying to force me to give in. One morning, while drinking coffee, I got a bank notification. Someone had tried to access the joint account where the inheritance was before I moved it. It didn't surprise me, but it made me angry. I knew it was my parents. Try to see if they could take something. Luckily, the trust was solid. The money was safe, but that attempt made it clear they wouldn't give up. I decided to reinforce everything, change my account passwords, set up security alerts, and spoke with my financial advisor to ensure there was no way they could touch my money. That afternoon, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, her eyes were red, like she'd been crying all morning. She hugged me, and for a second, I felt that familiar warmth, the mom who made pancakes on Sundays. But then she started talking. "Adrian, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Marcos is really bad. He doesn't sleep, barely eats. The debts are killing him. If we don't help him, I don't know what will happen." "Mom, I've helped Marcos for years," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I paid his bills, his debts, everything. But I'm not going to let you take my inheritance without my permission." She stepped back, looking at me like I was a stranger. "How can you be so selfish?" she said, her voice colder now. "Your brother lost his daughter. You don't know what that's like. We just want to save him." That burned me. Of course, I understood Marcos' pain. I love Marta too. I took her to park, bought her ice cream. Her death broke me. But I couldn't keep carrying Marcos' bad decisions forever. "Mom, it's not fair to ask me to sacrifice my future," I said. "That money is mine, and I protected it because I knew you wanted to use it without asking me." She didn't say anything else, just looked at me with disappointment and left, leaving me with a phrase that haunted me all night. "Your grandfather would never have done this." That hurt because my grandfather was a fair man, and that's why he left the money to Marcos and me, not for my parents to use as they pleased. But the guilt started creeping in. What if I was being selfish? I shook off those thoughts. I'd given too much. It was time to set a boundary. A few days later, things got stranger. I received an email from a lawyer I didn't know, saying he represented Marcos and wanted to discuss the inheritance distribution. My heart raced. A lawyer? Marcos was going to fight for the money legally. I called my financial advisor, who assured me the trust was untouchable, but the email made me nervous. It wasn't just a legal aspect. It was that my own brother was willing to confront me over money I'd already helped him earn, in one way or another, for years. That night, my phone rang. It was Marcos. I hesitated, but answered. His voice sounded strange, like he was about to break. "Adrian, I need that money," he said without preamble. "Without it, I have nothing. I lost Marta. My life's worth nothing without her. If you don't help me, I don't know if I want to keep living." I froze. Was he serious? Would he take his own life? Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part, the one that had dealt with his empty promises for years, didn't. It sounded like another attempt to manipulate me. "Marcos, don't do this," I said, trying to sound firm. "I'm not giving in. You need to get real help, not just money." "You don't understand," he shouted. "Without that money, I have nothing. I don't want to live like this." I hung up. I couldn't keep listening, but when I ended the call, something in me broke. What if he was telling the truth? What if he was really that bad? I tried to sleep, but couldn't. The idea that Marcos might do something drastic wouldn't let me rest. The next few days were hell. My mom kept calling, alternating between tears and anger. My aunts and uncles sent messages saying I was destroying the family. Even a cousin I barely saw wrote to say Marcos was in a dark place and I should help him. The pressure was constant, and every time I looked at my phone, I felt like I was drowning. One night, while eating dinner alone, someone pounded on my door. It was Marcos, but he wasn't alone. A big guy with a tough look was with him. Marcos was drunk, barely able to speak. "Give me the money, Adrian," he slurred, leaning against the door. "Don't make me do this." "Do what?" I asked, eyeing the guy with him. My pulse raced, but I wasn't going to show fear. The guy stepped forward, looking at me like he wanted to intimidate me. "Your brother needs help," he said in a deep voice. "Don't complicate things." I couldn't believe it. Marcos had brought someone to threaten me. I stood my ground, holding his gaze, though inside I was shaking. "Get out of my house," I said firmly. "There's nothing for you here." Marcos started yelling that I was a traitor, that I'd abandoned him. The guy just stared at me for a second longer before grabbing Marcos and dragging him away. I shut the door, locked it, and sat down, trying to calm myself. This was spiraling out of control. The next day, I went to the police. I didn't want to press charges against Marcos, but I needed to document what happened in case things got worse. I also spoke with my financial advisor, who suggested hiring a lawyer to protect myself from any legal moves by my family. I felt trapped in a nightmare, like my life had turned into a suspense movie. That night, I tried to contact Marcos to make sure he was okay after his threat on the call, but his phone was off. I sent a message. Nothing. I called my parents, and my mom told me coldly that Marcos didn't want to talk to me. Something didn't feel right. The doubt from his threat lingered, and though I didn't fully believe him, I couldn't ignore it. 2 days later, Marcos disappeared. I went to his apartment, but no one was there. His neighbors hadn't seen him. I called my parents, and my dad said Marcos had left without saying where. My mom cried on the phone, say it was my fault, that my selfishness had pushed him to this. I felt crushed. What if it was true? What if Marcos had done something because of me? The guilt and distrust were eating me alive, but part of me suspected something was off. This felt like another attempt to manipulate me. But I couldn't be sure. That night, I didn't sleep. Marcos' threat to take his life echoed in my head. Though I didn't fully believe him, the doubt gnawed at me. What if he was that bad? I called his phone over and over, but it was off. I sent messages. Nothing. The desperation grew, and though a voice in my head said it could be another trick, I couldn't take the risk. The next day, I went to police and reported him missing. I told them about his state, the threat, and the visit with his friend. I didn't mention the money to avoid complicating things, but I gave all the details I could. The officer was kind, saying they put out a search notice and contact me with news. When I got home, my parents were at the entrance to my building. My mom was crying, and my dad was furious. Before I could say anything, my mom lunged at me. How could you, Adrian, she screamed. Marcos is missing because of you. If something happens to him, I'll never forgive you. Mom, I didn't do anything, I said, trying to stay calm. I reported him missing. I'm doing what I can. My dad pointed at me, trembling with rage. You and your damn trust, he said. If you'd given him the money, Marcos would be here. How do you sleep at night, knowing your brother is lost because of your selfishness? Their words hurt, but something in their tone felt off, like they were acting, exaggerating to make me feel worse. I didn't say anything, just nodded and went up to my apartment. I didn't have the strength to argue. The next few days were hell. My parents kept calling, blaming me. My mom said Marcos was lost because of my selfishness, that my grandfather would be ashamed. My dad went further, saying if anything happened to Marcos, I'd be responsible. My aunts and uncles joined in, sending messages saying I'd broken the family. The guilt was heavy, but that voice in my head wouldn't shut up. This didn't seem real. It was too perfect, like they were staging a show to break me. I tried to go on with my life, but I couldn't. Every time I saw my phone, I expected news from the police. I talked to them daily, but there were no leads. Marcos seemed to have vanished. My friends, the few I talked to, told me to stay strong, not to give in, but it was hard. The idea that Marcos might be in danger because of my decision haunted me. A week later, everything changed. I was at work when the police called. They'd found Marcos, alive, in a motel on the outskirts of the city. He wasn't hurt, just resting, according to the officer. She said I could come see him. I felt relief, but also anger. Something told me this wasn't so simple. I went to the motel that afternoon. Marcos was in a small room, sitting on the bed, looking down. He didn't seem surprised to see me. The officer left us alone, and I sat across from him. What's going on, Marcos? I asked, try not to sound accusatory. You said you'd take your life. You disappeared, and now you're here like nothing happened. He didn't look at me, just shrugged. I couldn't keep going, Adrian, he murmured. I needed to get away. Get away? I repeated, incredulous. And why didn't you answer? Why did you let everyone think the worst? Then he looked up, and I saw guilt in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. I asked if our parents knew where he was, and he hesitated before answering, I don't know. Looking at the floor, I just needed time. That confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a plan. I left the motel and called a friend who works as a private investigator. I asked him to check my parents and Marcos' call logs and movements from the past few days. I didn't want to believe my family would go this far, but I needed the truth. 2 days later, my friend called. He had proof messages between my parents and Marcos planning his disappearance. They'd agreed Marcos would hide to make me feel guilty and give up the money. My mom had written, "If Adrian thinks we've lost you, he'll come to his senses." My dad told him not to answer my calls, to make it more believable. It was all planned. Even the lawyer was part of the show, an empty threat to pressure me. I sat in my apartment, looking at the messages my friend sent. I felt a mix of relief and betrayal. Relief because Marcos was okay, and betrayal because my own family had manipulated me like this. I thought about confronting them, yelling everything I felt, but then I realized it wasn't worth it. I'd given too much for them, and this was a final straw. I called my parents and asked them to come to my apartment. Marcos came too, though he barely looked at me. When they arrived, I put the printed messages on the table. "What is this?" my dad asked, frowning. "Proof," I said calmly. "You planned Marcos' disappearance to make me give up the money. It was all a setup." My mom paled. My dad started stammering, saying it wasn't true, that they were only trying to help Marcos. But Marcos said nothing, just looked down. His silence confirmed it. "I've given everything for this family," I said, my voice firm. "I paid Marcos' debts, supported him always. But this crosses a line. It's over." My mom started crying, saying they just wanted to save Marcos. My dad said I was overreacting, that family makes sacrifices, but I didn't listen. For the first time, I felt clarity. It wasn't my job to save them. "This ends here," I said. "I want no more contact with you. The money is in the trust, and it stays there. Find another way to solve your problems." Marcos finally spoke, his voice low. "Adrian, I'm sorry. I didn't want to go this far." "Too late." I replied without looking at him. I asked him to leave. My mom cried harder. My dad looked at me with contempt. But they left. Marcos was the last to go, and for a second I thought he'd say something more, but he just lowered his head and closed the door. That night, I sat with a beer, looking out the window. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years, I carried the responsibility of my family, but no more. I hired a lawyer to ensure they couldn't try anything legal and started planning my future. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. It's been a few weeks since then. I haven't spoken to my parents or Marcos. My friends have supported me, and I'm starting to rebuild my life. The money in the trust is safe, and I plan to use it for something that makes me happy, maybe travel or invest in something new. I don't know what will happen with my family, but it's no longer my burden. Sometimes, family isn't what you expect, and it's okay to let go.